Hello, welcome back to another episode of the SoundWorks Collection. I'm Michael Coleman, and I'm incredibly excited to talk with the sound team behind God of War Ragnarök, the latest release from the God of War series. For those of you that aren't familiar with the series, God of War goes back to 2005. If you can remember PlayStation 2, they had the critically acclaimed follow-up God of War in 2018, which is a PlayStation 4, and now with God of War Ragnarök being featured on the PlayStation 5, it's been an incredible experience to follow these characters and the worlds and the storyline. Joining us is Michael Kent, sound design supervisor, Beau Jimenez, sound design lead, Brian Higa, sound design lead, and Alex Previty, sound design lead. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here.
Any video game, for those who don't work in video games, might not realize that the lead time, how long it takes to produce a game, is pretty incredible. It's many years. It's a very iterative process. When you guys found out that this game was gonna be produced, what were your thoughts just about going back into the acclaimed world of God of War? I mean, from 2018, phenomenal, well-celebrated game. What were your guys' initial thoughts, just about even tackling a follow-up like this?
Well, it's funny because I started like a couple years into the process, actually. So there was an opening opportunity to work on the project, and I was like, I want to work on that game. 2018 was so good that I was like, I kind of want to be a part of it. And then getting there was like, you just realize how strong the team is, and you're like, okay, this is like a really cool place to work. Everybody's bringing their A game to the franchise. So I got to step up. I got to step up here because. Like everything I was coming out of the studio is just so high quality. So yeah, it was very challenging and rewarding at the same time, just in general.
What about for you, Beau? What were your thoughts going in, being that you were going to be, putting a lot of your time and attention to creatures and bosses and enemies, which is about 99% of this game?
Yeah, it's a lot of it. I feel like Santa Monica Studio as a studio is very combat centric, and they are some of the best in the industry at combat. And yeah, I mean, I guess stepping back, we started working on it. I feeling like there's, there are giants that came before us, the whole standing on the shoulders saying, and so we knew that, all right, we have a lot to do to hit that quality that 2018 hit, and 2018, sounded incredible. And so, I think we got there, but it took a lot of work. It took a lot of time, a lot of talent, a lot of people. And I guess starting with creatures, right? The fortunate thing is that the team ported a lot of the 2018 creatures to Ragnarök, but also hosted a ton of new creatures, new creature families, new bosses. So really the idea was, taking the style and aesthetic of 2018 and just honoring it, but doing a little bit of our own thing. One big thing we did was, and this kind of bleeds into Brian's pillar, the player. They're called cinematic finishers, or CS, but basically the idea is, after you stagger an enemy and the R3 button is prompted, there's a very cinematic moment where the camera pushes in, and then you just get this visceral, intense kill moment or damage moment or whatever it is, right? And that makes you feel like this vicious Greek god of Kratos. And so the sound, obviously, we wanted to feel incredibly filmic because it's a quick linear moment. So, we listened to a lot of movies and kind of realized like, a lot of the hard effects are in center. Oh, a lot of the cool, maybe non-diegetic whooshes and viciousness comes from the rears. And so I did a lot of, rear to front kind of like big sounding cinematic kind of quality to it. And yeah, so I would say a lot, we're inspired by a lot of the work you do, Michael, with SoundWorks. We listen to a lot of the film community, and because we're very inspired by them. And so that was a big approach to creatures, and when you kill the creatures is we want it to feel as cinematic as possible. And that's a big topic because it's gameplay, right? So the player needs to know, oh, this enemy's about to attack me. And so the concept of tells was really huge. Really needing to have a crystal clear mix, and Alex and Mike are going to talk a lot about mix probably later, but with creatures especially, you need to know when you're about to get hit, because we need that to be fair. We don't want you to go, what did I just get hit by? We need to make sure that you had a chance. You heard a terrifying sound of a creature, about to spit out acid or whatever it is, right?
If you look back and you say how many sounds were created for this game, you kind of lose track because you're not looking at the full picture, you're looking at piece by piece. I think of just Brian, your work with just Atreus and Kratos. The amount, can you give us a sense of the size and scale of how much dialogue, how much player what Foley or just aspects, even just for central characters like this that you're responsible for?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, the fun thing about Player Pillar, and also the most challenging thing is that it touches almost every single pillar, every single department, because a video game is based upon what players input is, like the buttons that they press, the things they select. The player can do all that, and anything that the player do touches all these different aspects. So Kratos and Atreus, they both were like heavy in terms of features that bled into all these different departments. So say for Kratos and Atreus, they both had we had to do a whole system for the Foley and their gear, what they were wearing, and not just like running around, but like runs, walks, sprints, landing, rolling, diving. And then on top of that, that goes into the footsteps on the surfaces. So for instance, we wanted to get way more detail with the footsteps in terms of the different actions that the player can do. And we want to have like a very distinct feeling between when you're walking, running, and sprinting. And then we also wanted really detailed ins and outs between all those different states. So we probably had around, I wouldn't say 17 different unique variations for footstep types. And then we had 25 different surfaces. Then multiply those by 2, because we have Kratos's, big weighty feel of their footsteps versus Atreus, who's way more nimble. So that's like 50 different surface types, and then 34 different variations of the different movement steps. So then that's just like moving around. So then we've still got Kratos' his runic abilities, which he's got about 10 for each weapon, 8 for the spear. There's 3 of those. And so some of them are coming back from 2018, and then the rest are new. And Atreus also, he has, his sets of runic abilities. And then they've both got these different weapons that they use for the combat. And yeah, so I could just keep going on, but yeah, there's lots, like we mentioned before, Santa Monica Studio, they're well known for their craft and their world-class, standard for combat. And so combat takes the forefront in terms of, the amount of the sound palette for these two.
Alex, for you, being that you're taking the lead on ambiences and as a technical mixer, interactive gameplay, ambience, there's a reason that these get segmented into just specialties of focus on just this, because when, what Brian's describing here, it starts to get into multiples that are just astronomical, and obviously focusing and being a specialist in one aspect is really important, because then there's maybe consistency and continuity across. Can you just describe the scope and scale again for ambiences? Because with this Ragnarok, we revisit some familiar locations, but now we're opening it up to different, like the 9 realms basically, that are pretty, they're vastly different sonically.
Yeah, exactly. I don't recall the exact number, but on God of War 2018, you know that these realms exist, but you can't really fully visit them like you can in this game. So in Ragnarok, you can visit all the 9 realms, and a lot of them are very extensive. And for example, in 2018, you could visit Muspelheim, but in this game, it's a lot more expanded. There's places you could never go before, which is great because you kind of learn more about all these different realms and what makes them special. But as a result, there's a lot more work to be done. in terms of establishing, all of these areas and having them sound a certain way. So in order to do that, it's definitely a lot of work because like some of the realms are absolutely humongous. Like Vanaheim, for example, this big jungle area that you can be in not only during the day, but also at night and change it, on a whim. So there's a lot of kind of challenges in terms of making sure that we had coverage everywhere, but also that everything sounded, immersive and fantastical. Because it's not, your average, area you're hanging out in. It's like very over the top. There's lots of rich lore and a lot of rich surroundings. A lot of flora and fauna that you've never seen before. So how do you kind of make it feel and sound as awesome as it looks? That was a pretty big challenge because luckily the art team at SMS is beyond talented. So trying to make audio that matches that or even comes close was definitely like really fun. But I think, there's a lot of work to be done to make it feel amazing. And, I think we tried our best and I'm really happy with how it turned out. But yeah, there's a lot of places in this game you can visit and, it's definitely fun to try to see how you can make each realm feel different,
When you start looking back at PlayStation 2, 3, 4, at the time, completely, groundbreaking technologies, but now where we're at with a PlayStation 5, both the game engine for the visuals and the audio is pretty incredible. So what could you guys tell going from a PlayStation 4 to a PlayStation 5 of in terms of the dynamic range, just like how are you complementing the visuals, because it's just a stunning game from top to bottom with characters and detail and just all the technology that gets put into just the visual aspect.
We want more fidelity, we want more detail in the pixels, right? Because the really magical thing about game audio is, and this is really audio in general, is when the picture looks pretty, good sound will elevate that picture, and it's vice versa. Like it's almost like they talk to each other. So like with Alex's ambiences, for instance, like he's going to make the visuals look more rich because the sound that you're hearing is almost elevating your senses. It's almost making you, maybe you hear rocks shifting. So now your eye looks more at those rocks and then you go, oh wow, the detail in like those rocks are really fascinating, really cool, right? Great textures, whatever, right? So yeah, I think the PS5 is, in the end, if you think about it, it's almost more work for us, right? Because like as the game gets more detailed, maybe they put more particle effects, really cool, like snow particle effects coming from trees or whatever it is, right? And so, we should probably hit that. You should probably hear some snow trickles when you bump into the tree and the snow trickles. To me, it's just richness, and I think the more rich the game is, the more you feel like you're in it, the more you feel like you're the player, the more you feel like invested in the game, which is really all we care about. We're storytellers, and we want the player to feel like they're that character, experiencing that world and getting enveloped in that world. So the higher fidelity the visuals are, the more we can lean into higher fidelity audio with more detail and more quality.
Right. We just have a higher frequency, like a wider range of frequency that we can play with.
The advancements of 3D audio too. So like the PS5 is pretty powerful and has some pretty amazing 3D audio tech. Like for instance, like if you play the game and you're fighting Thor, all like after every big move, he actually has like the thunder rolls that roll out. They're in quad, but they play above your head. So if you have headphones on, like it feels like you get this height perspective that's kind of insane. And there's a lot of like awesome stuff in the game that uses that tech, and also like the solid state drives, right? Like we can start playing things faster. Everything's just more snappy. More. We can play more content, get more layers. We can layer things more like you're in a film too, right? So you can actually mix things better. Lots of great stuff.
Like other than high fidelity output, and high fidelity visuals, like Mike was saying, like we also have higher fidelity like channel configurations, right? So you're not just limited to 5.1 or 7.1 as the high end of your output. I mean, now we have 3D audio, which is a combination of like various things, ambisonics, audio objects, things of that nature. So I think you can get away with a lot when you're strictly dealing with a channel-based format. That's not even Atmos. So if your maximum, supported channel count is like 7.1, you can kind of cheat a lot of things and make it feel good because you know that, the player is only going to be listening to this or lower. But once you have 3D audio, I think spatial precision is really important. So you can't just get away with putting like stereo sound on this creature anymore. Now you have to think, okay, well, its foot is here, its arm is here. So you kind of have to split sounds up and tag them on their actual locations. And you really have to think about like representing the space, representing the actual position of the sound in an accurate way, and designing your sounds to work like that, which is a little bit more work. But at the end of the day, I think when people are playing with the 3D audio enabled, it's a lot more of an immersive experience compared to more traditional, channel-based formats.
When we start digging into some of the specifics, I think even looking at Garm, one of the kind of like set pieces of or a good example of basically how the visual, like what we see the visuals of a character like Garm, you can do so much. And I think there's like little subtle, it's just like a master class in of itself. So maybe just using Garm as one example, what can you guys say, Beau? Maybe just describe the iterative process. I think, how does Garm, how is Garm a good example of, creatures in terms of like size and scale?
I mean, Garm really is a narrative tool to just kind of further push Kratos and Atreus' relationship, because the very short idea of Garm's purpose really was like, Atreus makes a mistake, he recognizes it's a mistake, and then Kratos, now the best dad on earth, he's trying to be a good dad, right? Now he goes, son, we're going to fix this together. And then they go and essentially tame Garm, and spoilers, but Fenrir's soul goes into Garm, and the soulless hellhound of Helheim, Fenrir's soul gets imbued with it, so now he's literally the cutest giant puppy on earth. So, and it was just it was just a big narrative tool that was really cool. So for me, in charge of like the boss feature, as well as kind of the interweaving narrative stuff throughout the level, I'm just thinking about storytelling, and the good thing about it was the game director on Ragnarok, his name's Eric Williams. He's really collaborative and really invested in his team. So me and him were able to talk often about Garm, like just approaching Garm. And he had really simple feedback, or not feedback, but direction on it that was perfect. And he said, Garm is a soulless hellhound and Fenrir is your best friend. And that's more than enough information to understand how to do the sound, right? So, when it's Garm the boss, the enemy, it's terror. It should send chills. It's gargantuan, terrifying. But then you totally flip that script when Garm becomes Fenrir, right? When it gets imbued with Fenrir. So you're hearing more emotive content, more puppy-like content. So for that, that was a good collaboration between Sweet Justice and I on that whole kind of feature. They did a lot of cinematic work initially on it. Then I only did a couple stuff with basically Fengarm, I think was a name for it. Looking at Randy Tom's work on How to Train Your Dragon, Toothless is a great example of a creature that can sound very scary, but then very endearing a moment later, all for the purpose of narrative, And so, yeah, it was that was really a really gratifying creature to final and to work on with the team. In terms of, because we're talking about 3D audio, yeah, that was the most large creature in the game. And the creature kind of spanned the whole level in Helheim. So you're trying to tame, trying to basically keep Garm out of Helheim because he's destroying the whole realm, right? Atreus does his ways. He thinks how to get Garm, and then Kratos does his. And Kratos is the hard way, right? Which is kill, stab a bunch of times with the blade, right? And so it's cool to see that dynamic of them working together and continuing their relationship. But yeah, in terms of 3D audio, because it's such a grand object in the world, Garm, you think about like, all right, there's, he has obviously 4 paws, 4 feet. So each one is the feet are correctly tagged on each paw. He has a long, physics and key animated chain. So, there's different positions on that are on the rig where I am playing sounds up here on the chain or at the end of the chain to hear the dragging. So, if you go under Garm, you kind of hear him all around you, right? But then if you're more distant, it's still pretty accurate in game space where you're hearing all of these sounds firing off. So, that was a great example of, just spatiality, right? And using the 3D audio tech for the PS5, you can get a great sense of that.
Brian, even diving deeper into Atreus's the sonic arrow, I find that when we talked about impacts and interaction with enemies, these are cues that we're listening for. We're looking for impact, whether we hit a character or not. Talk about the designing the sonic arrow, because to me it's a signature sound of Atreus, and it's very rewarding to fire that arrow.
Sonic arrows, I think that was one of the first things I started working on when we were working on Ragnarok, and it was one of those things that was just iterated on for the next 2.5, 3 years. Up until that last week we were in the build. But yeah, you really honestly, Santa Monica Studio made it really easy to design sounds for this, because whenever they did their iterations, they'll go hard in one direction and then find out answers quickly and see what works. So it's always, inspiring to see what they're doing first and how I can kind of help in terms of reinforcing some of those goals. But luckily, sonic arrows, and it's in its name. It's, it has to do with sound. So I knew already, okay, this is going to be a great showcase for sound to help kind of tell the story of this ability. So yeah, I think it was one of those things we built over time. So I had an iteration in there, and I knew that we wanted to have a tonal element so that where it's able to, pick your ear while it's being shot. And I think the interesting thing that they were really trying to figure out the timing for was that moment of an impact where it hit something. There's almost like a moment where something kind of comes out and then it implodes. And so it was really awesome to be able to kind of play with that timing and try to tell this really cool story of something that's like bursting and then getting kind of sucked in and then also exploding again. So we did a lot of iteration, tons of iteration to get feedback from, combat design, the director, all these guys, everyone else on the audio team. We just wanted to make sure it felt good each time, because I think that's at the end of the day, that's what we want to design for, especially for combat. It's does this feel good? You won't know until you have the controller in your hand and you're literally doing it. So we got a lot of source from all different parts of the production. And one of the things that we might go into a little bit later, but we went on a desert trip to the Painted Valleys. I think that was the name. And we were mainly going there as kind of a audio team get together so that we can go out and record things out in the field for fun. But the goal was to get these really cool IRs for Alex. And luckily we had Jeremy Rogers with us, and he's a expert whippist. I don't know what the name. Yeah. So we basically went and we found really cool areas that we could have that really strong transient to capture an IR and see what we could bounce off different parts of the canyon. that moment was already planting a seed for me, because like it was like that crack. And it kind of came back later when we were designing for that sound for the Sonic, because we wanted to be able to hit. Players need to know when you hit something, and that crack is just so iconic, and like when you hear it, you kind of know what it is. So I wanted to pull that element and see that, and then also we wanted to be able to have the arrow by feel like an arrow, but also have this really interesting tonal element for sound. So we got a lot of recordings while we were, in the desert. We got recordings of just slingshots of bullet casings and paper clips. We found out that the things that made the best sounds, like the best source, were things where that object could manipulate the air around it as it traveled. So like bullet casings, of course, you can get this really cool whisper or whistle. And I think Alex had this really great idea about paper clips at the time. And that was even cooler because the sound of the paperclip is just really dispersing all this air around it. So we got a lot of cool source from that. And then I knew that I wanted something really kind of pleasant and tonal for the era as well. So this was during, in the middle of lockdown, and we were all in our homes. And I wanted to pick up everyone pick up talents and skills. And I ordered an ocarina. And I just was trying to, just learn it for fun. But I also was like, well, maybe I can get some cool hollow tones from this and use it for the sonic arrows. So that became kind of the basis of the total element for the buys. And also when it explodes, just to be able to help the player kind of pick out a tonal element when things are like in the heat of battle, they know that their sonic arrows activated. But I found this really cool, I think it was like laser bass, and I was just kind of messing with it. And I was just, I remember playing it, and like, it would get these really cool, like really warbly sounds in there. But then it also had this really synthetic laser high end, mid to highs. So all I did was I got an EQ and wiped all those high and mids out. And what we were left with was just really interesting, smooth, like motion of these like energy, like almost chaotic energy. So that was kind of the meat of the sonic arrows. And then like all together, just getting it in there and iterating and feedback. That was kind of like, that was the road to where we ended up with.
It's a question of, hey kids, do you want to become a sound designer for video games after what you just described? It's like, that is the level of detail that I just, you see it obviously in, in film and TV, but I think video games, people are, they kind of forget how much tech and how much consideration goes into characters and world building. Just putting Thor as a centerpiece. Michael, talk to me just about the first battle introduction of him. To me is just like, it seems like a whole episode of a TV show. It's just it keeps going and it keeps evolving, and he's the character returns in a way that I feel like is just so gratifying as a player. You guys are doing. There's so many elements just to Thor. Even do you want to talk about him?
Yeah, like early on, I wanted to. This is the one I get. There's like as a supervisor, you can only do a couple things, like besides like helping manage the team and all that. Right, unblock the team is really what I was doing, but I was lucky to be able to do Thor and some spear work. But Thor, I guess the idea was like, like how do you make him sound powerful and big, but not Marvel was the question, right? Not that Marvel, Marvel sounds great. It's just that they wanted its own identity. So the idea, I guess, really was finding what a grounded hammer would sound like. So we have some tone and some like nice whoosh in there. Like, U-bars make really cool whoosh sounds, and they make it's almost like a very tonal, like kind of airy sound. And you mix that with like, we have some video of it. It's like just like processed metal, like just to create overtones. And then we'd use that with that tone. And then the electricity is actually, one sec, this here. I use a transducer microphone, and I ran this ball through this modular rig, and I was using a transducer microphone, and it actually became a controller, and it was picking up the electricity in a way, and I was amplifying it in a way where you could get movement out of it. And the further away you pulled away the mic, it would like create these like movements. So that was the base of the electricity. But then on top of that, cellophane is one of your best electricity sounds, like to get that whistly kind of sound to it. So that was layered in it. So it would always start with like a high whistle kind of sound, go into this meteor electricity. And then the tails were actually like duct tape, like folded and like just getting really almost like AMSR, like going up to the mic and like clicking on the like this. And then you distort that. It's like really cool. So those elements with a hammer. The idea is you had his basic moves. So you had his basic swings, and then he always had an uppercut, or he has like a hammer down. Each move had to build to those other moves. So the basic hammer swings were always kind of smaller. And then as he got into the bigger moves, like basically the uppercut, at the end of the uppercut, in the middle of it, actually, I used sonic booms, like kick drums, and like just to push the air. And that would always lead into like quad thunder. And that thunder, like I said, I would delay the sound. The idea with Thor was I tried to delay the sound as much as I could to make it sound as big as possible. And then like it would start sounding out of sync, and I'd just bring it back to the point where it was like in sync. And then, like once everything was working, it was just a lot of iteration, and then fighting Kratos over and over again.
I'm not leaving till I see the real you. Get up!
A lot of the tonal stuff when the hammer and the axe collide was all stuff we did in the studio. And then just distorting metal, like hitting it really hard. Oh, using a Nagra too. We recorded a bunch of stuff with the Nagra. And if you overdrive a Nagra, it has the best tape saturation. And so we were banging metal and distorting it, then cleaning it, and then just, it was great. So all of that together. And in the end fight, obviously he's more powerful. So like that was a whole nother section, right? So there was like all those sections, and then in the middle you have all the like transitions. So, spoiler alert, he kills Kratos and then revives him. So yeah, it was just fun to put all that together and just have it all work. One of the coolest things though is when he recalls his hammer. When I was talking to the designer, I was like, okay, what's the thing that makes this really cool? And he's like, oh, he recalls his hammer by snapping his fingers. I was like, what? No way. So right away, like we had to do that. So Alex and I and Beau, I think Brian was there too. We all went into the hallways. We started like recording snaps, did some in the studio. And I think it's a combination of Alex and mine snap. But yeah, so we try to play that up wherever we could, right? So if you'll hear the snap, the hammer will come back. And then it's all in the cutscenes too, but it's like one snap, because the game director, like once we got it, we're like, that's the snap. We can't change that. Like that's it. So in all the trailers, everything, that it's that one snap.
This is for Modi! You put him last, even in death. The fuck you say? Modi saw us in fear of you. He died of the wounds you gave him. Oh, we got a model father here.
When you describe it now and I play it back, you forget how many, not iterative steps, but just like the sequence of a character and the nuance, like we're talking about, the nuance of what you guys are creating is so essential, for like proximity and spatial awareness. Like, a lot of times you're like trying to dodge incoming enemies, and the spatial audio is giving you proximity and being able to place them. A lot of times we hear people before we see them. Alex, what can you say? How do you prep your ambiences, and how does that get layered in terms of volume wise, in terms of, you know, when it comes to battles, and also the fact that, you know, you have someone like composer Bear McCreary who's delivering you music that's also going to play for a lot of these. So yeah, what's the delicate balance for all that?
As unfortunate as it is to say, most of the time ambience is probably the least important thing in the mix. I mean, it's very important because if it's done well, you'll never notice it, and it really helps establish the setting and even the mood, right? But when things are getting really important, either combat-wise or narratively, it's kind of the last thing you want to get in the way, because at that point, there's a lot more important stuff in there, like combat sounds, enemy tells, you know, dialogue, his beautiful music, you know, Bear's beautiful score. So we've had a lot of stuff going on. So the biggest one, which I think was Mike's idea, was that when music comes in, even ambient music, not even like cinematic or battle music, we would actually use the RMS of the music with a super slow attack and release, like really slow, and turn down the ambience, but also apply a high shelf to it. So you still kind of get the body and the feeling that there's like presence there, but all the really rich detail, like that would fight with a lot of the music stuff, kind of went away. So it was kind of like the seamless, smooth juggling of like the music. So when the music would kind of ebb and flow, so when the music would kind of die down and be a little bit more gentle, the ambience would come up, and then when the music would swell, you know, the ambience would turn down to kind of give it some room, because the last thing we want is all this nasty buildup of all these frequencies, when in reality the music's a little bit more important. If it's swelling, you know, we want to hear the notes that are in there. In combat too, the combat music was quite a bit louder than ambient exploration music, so we leverage that even further. So when combat music is playing, it's like really turning down the ambience. But in the game settings, if you turn music off, now the ambience won't be ducked as much, so it's a little more present. But we are doing some basic state-based stuff too. So when combat does start, we're turning ambience down a little bit just to get it out of the way. And then with cinematics, every single cinematic in the game has its own custom state we're in, so we can fine-tune the ambience for each cinematic. So even though when the cinematic stems were delivered to us, there is some ambient stuff there to help narratively build the scene. Like most of what you're hearing, or a lot of it in some cases, is the in-game ambience. And we want it to be cohesive and seamless, because God of War, you know, has the thing where it all feels like one big camera move. There's never a cut. You know, it's like 1917 style. So in that regard, we also want the ambience to feel similar in that it's all seamless. So if we like had a hard cut and then now we're hearing a different thing, like it would just kind of throw the player out and kill the immersion. So we were doing a lot of management of every part in the game. We were always looking at ambience to see how we could play it up or play it down depending on the moment. And luckily, a lot of the systems we set up were systemic in real time. So it kind of just mixed itself once you get it all set up. But that, in conjunction with all the kind of one-off mixing we were doing for narrative moments, I think really helped it sit in the right place. So, you know, there's a lot of humility being an ambience person, knowing that like yours is going to be the first one to go when things get real. But I think, you know, as long as the core experience as a player, you know, needs to hear is being delivered well, then like whatever makes it happen.
Kind of focusing on another aspect, a big component of this game is this, you know, I love the pronunciation. Gjallarhorn, is that correct? Gjallarhorn? Is it?
Yeah, Gjallarhorn. I think Gjallarhorn
yeah.
is yeah. This one is weird because, like, when we knew that the Gjallarhorn was going to be in, we're like, well, what are we going to do for this? Like, you know, we can find some horns. COVID hit. We're like, none of us can go into a studio. We're all in our homes. We're like, okay, well, what are we going to do for this? Like, I don't know, but I've got a bunch of friends at studios in Sweden, And I decided to call my friend, and I was like, okay, hey, do you know anybody well versed in Viking horns? He's like, I do. And he introduced me to Joran Hallmarken. And this guy, like, it's so funny because if you've ever been to Stockholm, there's a bar there. It's a Viking bar, and it literally, like, it's lit by candles. It's like legit. And you walk in, they have a door that like is a bucket weight. You have to open it. It's like you go downstairs, and he used to announce people when they came in with a horn. And he told me this, and I go, I've been to that bar. He's probably announced me. It was crazy. So we got on that conversation, and then he started talking about horns. He started talking about like the bronze lure, which is like a 15th century horn. It's this crazy huge brass horn. I've never seen anything quite like it. And when you listen to it on the internet, it's like there's literally there's a YouTube clip. I looked it up. I listened to it, and I think the first comment was like, "Oh, that sounds like something that would start Ragnarok." And I was like, "That's crazy." So he had a player that had one, brought him in. We ended up recording that horn plus a bunch of other Viking horns, like a bunch of like bull's horns and some more like wooden stuff. But what was interesting about that is it took a little bit to coordinate because, you know, none of us could go anywhere. And then what was going on at the same time was we had Boom libraries helping us record a bunch of animal source for Beau. So we ended up talking to them to see if they could go up to Sweden because they're based in Germany. And they said, yes, we'll go up there and help you record this. So they went up. Johan basically coordinated the whole thing, got a horn player, set up 3 recording. There's like a stone pit, another recording in like a studio. And they set it up, and we got, I think it was like over 58 gigs or something of horns. And it was crazy. And they all came out really good. At the end, it was actually a combination because the horn in game is very much an animal's like tusk. So what I wanted to do is use the weight of the bronze lure, and I mixed it with the more bone heavy one to get that kind of sound to it, and then created overtones, and then I distorted it heavily. and in the mix in the in the cinematic, we basically played it 12 dB hotter than everything else, and yeah, it was a feature of that scene. But it was crazy because all that came together. I'm so happy I did. Sometimes you just got to reach out to your friends, and it's good.
There's a pretty big collaboration too with the music because it had to be in the right key, but also in terms of the pacing of like the amazing cue that's happening right before, and then the horn gets blown, and there's kind of like that pause, and that wouldn't have been possible without having the awesome music team be able to collaborate with us back and forth to get a rhythm that felt really nice to where like you're kind of just like stopping everything you're doing to watch him like change fate with this horn blow, and then the music swells. Like I think that was a really cool collaboration that kind of happened a little later on, but ended up making it like probably the best cinematic in the game.
Talk to me about Bjorn the bear. I find that bear vocals, we've experienced bears in video games and movies, but this bear is a little different. It's like there's an element of this bear that it's so well done, and as a player, I'm just like terrified of him. How did you guys tackle Bjorn the bear? Yeah,
I think even before the bear was even a thing, like I think we were just trying to watch movies to get inspired by. When the idea of this first bear fight, this boss fight came up, it's like, well, obviously it has to feel as good as that. Like, because that was kind of our benchmark, honestly.
Atreus, where are you?
Well, we found the bear, or he found us.
we wanted to have to feel ferocious, but we wanted to also have a hair of like, okay, this is not just some normal bear, you know, or like a big Norse bear. It's like there's a hint of like a almost like a godly bear because of who this bear was, you know. So yeah, we definitely wanted to make this bear feel larger than life compared to other ones.
When the bear roared, you know, you're getting, and I learned this from working on Garm. What really works in this engine is to, with a giant roar, you create the fiction that the roar, you know, propagated throughout the world so intensely. It's such a high SPL sound that you're hearing like echoes from distant canyons, right? Like that's how, and that just kind of evokes terror, hearing like the power of a roar, right? So we did a lot of, you know, quad, more tonal, spatial, quad sounds that are on top of the you know, the spatial roar. And yeah, a lot, you know, same with impacts. You know, when the bear like slams down, we made sure that there's this iconic massive sound that also feels like it's affecting the world almost, you know. And that's a big challenge, you know. I feel like a traditional, you know, even games back 10, 15 years ago, like thing goes boom and it's just, you hear it right there, right? And so now when a thing goes boom, we think more about like, well, what is that doing to the environment, right? So maybe with snow, right, you might hear the trees shake or like, you know, you might hear that foliage rattle, the tree branches rattle, snow, that, you know, what is the acoustics of that boss space? So we're honoring all of that. We're honoring like the environment. What does it sound like when a big high SPL sound happens in that space? Yeah,
and I think because this was one of these earlier creatures that we worked on, we probably went more ham than we did if we were to start on a creature later on, just because of, you know, being at the point of the project. So yeah, that first one there's unique vocals on almost every single animation. There's much more tales just involved in general to make that piece. Since that's the first boss fight in the game, we wanted just to make it feel really larger than life and pull you in.
Let's shift the conversation to Ingrid. To me, you know, once again, a pivotal kind of weapon and character, and the nuances in Ingrid to me is like, you can't overlook how much iterative process you probably went through. Talk to me just about the design phase, coming up with, obviously, you know, we're familiar with Ingrid, but then we're seeing it again in a way that I feel like has been, you know, reimagined. So talk to me about the process.
Just from the get-go, Ingrid, the pitch for us was, okay, so Atreus has a companion, and Ingrid is not a person, it's a sword. And she has emotions, she has feelings, she talks to Atreus, she has thoughts. And so obviously for audio, for sound, you know, that's a dream. Like, oh, I get to, you know, do the vocals of a sword. Like, let's go. Let's make this happen. So, yeah, you know, and from talking about more referenced, you know, Doctor Strange's cape, the stuff Nia and the team at Skywalker, what they did there. Of course, R2-D2, you can't not talk. And that's kind of the thing too, is, you know, I feel like a lot of like, all right, we need it to talk, but it's not vocals. Like R2-D2 is always in the conversation. But the thing is, you know, we didn't want to go digital, right? We wanted it to sound incredibly organic and natural, because that kind of evokes the realness of the sword. It's literally just a sword imbued with magic. So sonically, it should just sound like a sword with some magic, right? And so the sound recording, the sound acquisition phase was so fun, right? So like one idea that we had was having glass particles on top of a cymbal that we bowed, recording with a Senkin, right? So you're getting this magical, organic, tinkling, trickle, whatever, you know, glassy sound, slowed down to where you're hearing each little modulation each time it like hits, the cymbal. So it's a tonal metal, but glassy. So there's a little magic element, a bit of a magical element there.
Really? Sure, why not?
The idea of, like, let's take a sword and then, maybe put some little rocky debris on it and then grind it. And then that's a more physical element that we can maybe do some granular synthesis, or just I think I just used the raw stuff, really, like, because it just worked, right? So it's thinking about like honoring, like, this is just a sword, but how can we record sounds to exemplify the character of a moving physical sword? And so, a lot of really fun sound recording happened with that for the physical element, and then the vocal element also imbued with natural sounds, right? The same way Ben Burt used a lot of his voice for R2-D2, right? The whistles, organic air moving through, a human body, lips, whatever, right? So like similar to Brian, an ocarina was a really cool way to get more natural sounding air moving, tonal, pretty sounds of just air moving through an object with just human whistles. And so I think I use Logic's Alchemy for morphing those two sources together to create just a really natural sounding, organic sounding, essentially the character of the voice is that. And then all of the other physical elements are kind of the stuff to ground it in as a sword, And Sweet Justice did an incredible job ingesting a lot of assets and designing the Ingrid intro cinematic you hear. It was that was a really fun one, and that's honestly credit to Santa Monica Studio, right? Like, just the fact that they go, hey, let's have a talking sword. That's all we want to hear for audio people, right? So.
How does Foley play into a video game like God of War Ragnarok, and what can Foley do for video games that otherwise you're not like, what is the interactivity or what is the contributions of Foley? How does Foley play into a game like Ragnarok? Because they're not hard effects always, but they're subtleties that really show up in a big way.
It's just the realism, right? Like Foley, you can, especially with the talented Foley artists we have, we can just hit something that sounds just natural, organic. The sled vehicle, that was Alicia and Dawn just going to town, finding ways to exemplify this big weighty body. There's two gods riding a sled, so it needs to sound beefy, it needs to sound impressive. But still needs to sound very natural. So when you're grinding on the ice, you're hearing ice debris, you're hearing ice cutting. They basically provided like the real elements, right? And then as sound designers, of course, you can pull an ice skater grinding to a stop. You can pull elements from your library to make it feel more like it's more hype, more like, it's more visceral. But I think the Foley is just the glue to the real. And we need, with a world like God of War, a really natural world, you can say there's a lot of like, of course, a ton of fantasy elements, but the fantasy elements are more fantastical because of us grounding the audio, right? And the teams, the art teams, all of them grounding the visuals with real visuals,
It's like an experimental process. Like we'll go to, our Foley teams, and when we were getting the sounds of all the footsteps on the surfaces, and even we got a lot of new source for Kratos' shields, we were almost looking for our team to be like, let's work together. Like, let's figure out cool sounds, or like, just play around and figure out how can we discover interesting, unique things that we would have even thought of beforehand, and just experiment. And so that's the fun process, just to be able to go like, let's this is the idea, but let's see what else we can come up with. And we'll record some Foley on our own, but like if we go to, these artists, they know the ins and outs of this whole process, and they can quickly go like, oh, I know exactly the prop I need to use for this thing. Or maybe we can experiment with this and combining it with this thing. And then they're rubbing all these together. It's just a real joy to watch them work, and super inspiring, which we get that from them. And we hope that we can also just help inspire them at the same time. It's just like a really great process.
Alex, talk to me about the spark of the world. I find that visually it's just stunning. There's so many directions you can like represent it sonically. How did you guys want to represent the ambiences and everything else going on?
Yeah, that area is pretty wacky, like in the best way. Like I feel like that's just the art team pulling out all the stops because, like Beau was saying, like it's fantasy but it's grounded, and that kind of goes for basically every space in the game is pretty grounded in one way or the other. The spark of the world is just like absolutely insane. Like the visual effects, like the skybox, I guess it's beautiful, right? I think from a lore perspective, it's like when all the 9 realms or the universe was created in Norse mythology, it's like, Niflheim and Muspelheim, which is respectively the ice and fire realms, basically. They combined and created steam, and then, the whole universe was born. It's like their version of the Big Bang. So this is kind of like the visual and physical representation of that space. So, went through a few iterations when we were working on it, but at the end of the day, it turned out to be like super compelling. So I was like trying to make the audio at least sort of match how cool it looked because, it was very inspiring. So, I kind of made 2 distinct sonic palettes. Like one was a lot of icy, glassy, tonal sounds. And the other was just kind of very like vicious, physical, rocky, lava, fire stuff. And I kind of just like split the entire area down the middle and placed icy sounds on this side and fiery lava sounds on that side, and kind of just played with it until it felt like good. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's pretty subtle, but like it's very like, subconscious the way it makes you feel. And it added a lot of really cool visual effects for like wind whipping and like a lot of hazy stuff. So they just put some crazy wind in there. But obviously the spark of the world there's the spark of the world like in the middle. And like, that can sound any which way because it's just like a big ball of light that's with stuff swirling into it, right? It's kind of like a black hole, but a white hole. So I was like, I don't know what this should sound like. It could sound like anything, right? It's like a blank canvas for sound design. And I normally don't do sounds that are that crazy. So I'm like, I don't know. Like I started messing around and like using some kind of like granular stuff just to try to generate some sort of interesting textures and sound, and everything matched the visuals, which is at the end of the day what you want to do, at least at a baseline. But like nothing was really like that cool. So it's like, okay, I'm just gonna like mess around and just look through our sound library and just try to find something that like sounds interesting. So like I'll just put the pitch slider at like 10% and just play stuff in the library at random. And I don't know how I got there, but I think I typed in something wrong, but I found like a kids choir warming up in a gymnasium. And it was just weird because everyone was like not singing notes together, so it was very like discordant, but it felt very like, well, youthful, right? Because it's a kids choir. So I was like, oh, that sounds kind of fun. So I just like put it in to my Reaper session, and even just raw, it sounded like amazing. It was a little noisy. I had to clean it up, and I ended up doing some like processing to make it more tonal, just to make it feel a little more clean. But that's kind of the bass tone, is just like this children's choir, just like slowed down, and just it sounds like it's always morphing. But then like at some point in the game, spoiler, like you stab Surtur in the heart with your Blades of Chaos, and he falls into it in order to start transforming him into the big bad Ragnarok that shows up at the end of the game. So like his heart is like a really important part of him because it's Sinmara's heart, right? His partner. So his heartbeat is kind of like a part of him, and like that's what's starting the process of him transforming. So are we going to have a heartbeat in there at some point, right? When he's in there like hanging out. So at the time, you know, my wife was pregnant. You know, now we have a daughter. She's great. But at the time, she was not born yet. So my wife had this like, what is it called? Like a sonogram. It's like a Doppler, right? It's like a little microphone that's, you know, ultrasonic. And luckily, it had like a 3.5 millimeter output on it. So just for my own like life memory cataloging purposes, I just wanted to record, you know, her heartbeat while she was, you know, in the womb. But then like I was thinking, oh, this would be great, you know, like she could have her first uncredited appearance like in a game. There is a distinct shift, like pre-Ragnarok being in the, you know, spark of the world and post. But yeah, that was a pretty fun area to work on. It was one of the only areas where I actually had time to like figure it out and like really try to be a little bit more creative than some of the other areas, because like it was just such a distinct little pocket that was very like defined, and it was really cool to make it sound hopefully as good as it looks.
You know, going back to some of the weapon tech, we have this the Draupnir spear. How do you pronounce it?
Draupnir spear.
Draupnir spear. Talk to me about this. The first evolution of going out to, it sounds like going out to Bakersfield and find a bunch of metal with you. It looks like you and Beau and TJ. Yeah, talk to me about the evolution of this spear.
You know, like the spear is interesting because you've got three weapons. I'll answer some of this and I'll let Brian answer too, because, you know, he was a player. But yeah, so we had three weapons, and you've got axe, which is, you know, Leviathan axe, which is like ice. And you've got the Blades of Chaos, which are fire, and the spear. And the spear, it was interesting because it's kind of wind powered. So a lot of that's why it has like the nice flag on it. And what's interesting about the Draupnir spear is it's actually a ring. I think I have the ring somewhere, but yeah, Kratos wears it. It's a magic ring, and it like regenerates. So every time he uses a spear, like throws it into the world, it'll regenerate a new one. So what's interesting about it, I mean, we did record a bunch of stuff in Bakersfield, and that was at COVID again. We couldn't go into a studio, so we're like, well, what's the safest thing we can do? We can drive in the middle of nowhere, mask up, and start banging metal in the field. So we literally did that. Got a bunch of cool tonal stuff. Again, brought that back in the studio and started working out what the tone was. And it took a bit, like a couple weeks, just finding the right tone. Because essentially the spear is something, if you think about it, it is actually one of the first weapons Kratos used when he was a child. Back in Sparta, like Sparta times, like he learned how to fight with a spear. And so the sound of the spear had to feel like he's been using this thing forever. Everything about it is snappy, punchy, and focused. So each move, so it starts, you've got, I think it's a basic combo is like 4 moves. And you've got like the heavier combos, like 5 moves. Each one of those sounds different. So it looks different, sounds different, but it has a tonal quality to it. So when you move through the move, it actually kind of sings to you. again, it was like looking at Ben Burt lightsabers. How do I do that with a spear? And it was taking metal tones. It was using some combustion source I had, like fire going through plastic tubes. Kind of sounds really cool. Has like a wool kind of tonal element to it. Like that sounds very a polearm like. So a combination of that, and then there's like a specific move, the third move in, when he hits, like he'll hit it like this, like it's like really hard. You actually see the pull move. So I actually have a tonal element there. It just kind of rings out. You only get that if you're swinging it randomly. If you hit somebody, all those sounds cut off. So like as you go through the moves, it goes from like very tonal, sharp sounding to the last bit where we have a ton of wind that comes in. It's like a stereo wind with like debris and like leaves and everything. And all that stuff happens. But if you're hitting somebody, that all gets cut off with the visceral impacts. But yeah, it's pretty fun because you can play the combos, the R1 and R2. And if you go between them, it has like a cool rhythm and staccato like feel to it that gives it like a ton of character.
Mike just went to town with all this great source and this and like the library of things that he pulled from. So for the we just basically Lewis Everest, another sound designer that we worked with, our coworker from UK, him and we basically just filled in all the gaps where things were just coming in online later, which is just included like all his runic abilities where he can literally summon huge tornadoes or cyclones into the world. And so we basically would create sounds for those moments. And also each weapon kind of had, for more or less, they have like a unique intro, like kind of everything, like we use that moment in the mix to kind of turn everything down and have this moment like just to feature Kratos. And like a kind of almost like a unique tell that let players know that they're doing something awesome. So we wanted to have that same feeling, that same kind of setup for the spear runics. So we had like a 5.1 start sound that we try to make it feel a little bit different for each runic, but each one had that kind of sonic identity in terms of what it was doing. And we also got a lot of recordings of just hand pats because we wanted to really make you feel like Kratos he's used this spear all his life, or he knows how to use it. And so we want to have this really tactile feel of him manipulating it. So whenever you're playing, there's all these, we almost turn up the sound of him grabbing things, or if he's spinning it and catching it. So we just really want to let players have that tactile feel of like, yeah, I'm doing this along with Kratos as well.
One interesting thing is the explosions, because you can throw them out in the world, like I said. The explosion tech's interesting because you can have like up to 9 spears in the world. But we built this tech around it, so like if you throw one out, it'll play the last explosion. If you throw 2 out, it'll play the first, then the last. If it's 3 or more, it's first, middle, last. So we got this tech, and so there are different sounds for that cadence. But what that kind of cadence does, it gives you like this feeling of a slot machine. So it's like ba da ba da ba da ba. So like it just becomes this very addictive thing to do when you're throwing spears out in the world and like blowing people up and they're like floating through the air. It's like it's very visceral feeling. And then the actual ping, so you actually detonate it by pinging a spear on the ground, was again through those metal recordings, and that took forever to hear that thing over and over again. Like I think we went through like 20 versions until we found the one. It's like one sound with like a different tails depending on how hard you hit it, but that one sound took so long.
Beau, can you talk about, maybe I'm just looking at the list here, if I pronounce these right. Is it Charlie, Drekkie, the Flame Phantom, the Berg's Mother, the Wisp, the Nokins? There's a lot of other very specific visual, each one has a physicality and a visual, point of reference with the game design. But yeah, I mean, even looking at, this Charlie is it Charlie? Is that right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Charlie.
Charlie, like we were introduced to him and before, it's this giant tortoise. I don't know, like what's fun about creatures? I mean, like, don't you get tired of like, oh my God, I have to come up with a unique, I mean, it just seems so overwhelming.
You can frame it as like, oh God, because literally there's 120 variations of creatures. That means like, a Draugr with a sword, a Draugr with an axe, right? So there's multiple of the same, but variations, but 120, which is a lot, right? So you can view it as like, oh God, this is a lot. And sure, it is, but like, you have Charlie. So like Charlie is like, it's Freya's house. So Freya's house is literally a giant tortoise with a beautiful like bunch of foliage and trees on top of him, and he has to get up to let you into the house that's underground. So just right off the bat, right there, like that's the most fantastical, awesome thing I've ever heard in my life, right?
Please, Charlie. Hey, big guy. I'm here now. Don't you worry. I need to get you warm. You're gonna have to stand to let me into that house. Think you can do that? Come on, Charlie. You have to do this. I can't help if you don't. Emily! Emily! Good boy.
And that's the thing is like, as Santa Monica makes all these really brilliant concepts and ideas and they get put in the game, it's I think for a lot of us, it's less like, oh God, this is a lot, more like, oh my God, this is so cool, right? And there's a lot of creatures that are like that. Like, the Noken is an interesting one in that it's a kind of a sound design challenge in that the Noken sings, right? And the song gives buffs and benefits to enemies around. So you have to kill the Noken first, or else you're just going to be hitting this thing that's overpowered, right? And, you need like an iconic sounding a song to catch the ear, has to cut in the mix. So, I mean, there's a lot of just really great sound opportunities with all of these creatures. They're incredibly varied. We have a dragon, like 3 new dragon types on this game, and one is like smaller water based, another is big kind of like rhino land based, and then one is air based, so it flies. Your classic like almost like a fire breathing dragon. But yeah, so each of them, you can put a bunch of you can just have a lot of thought process with each of them. Oh, maybe this one has these giant paws sounds more like a rhino. Maybe this one sounds more So it's fun. Yeah, you just you can think a lot about it, and creatures you can put a lot of effort into, like fiction behind it.
I have to remind myself that you guys had several years to work on this. I'm thinking of like a traditional schedule, and it doesn't make it any easier. I just, when we start talking about quantities of sounds that are produced for any game title, especially one like this, there's, it's insane. I want to ask you, Beau, about even a simple thing like using this tuning fork. Was that for the assassin? What was the use of that?
So that was actually a little bit before my time. I think Brian and Mike.
Yeah, Mike and I can't remember exactly what spurred that idea, but
because the Dark Ones in the first game, we were going through their sound palettes and we found out that the designers before were using a lot of tuning forks in their sounds. Okay. I ended up going on Amazon and finding like a tuning fork set. I was like, all right, let's go to town with this. And then you had the Sankin, and we went in, and I think we went into the studio and we had a bunch of them in our hands and were banging them so you get the overtones. I'd move them, and then he was moving the Sankin.
Yeah, so we took the idea of Ben Burtt's idea of recording a source for lightsabers, of having the mic and waving it so you get that kind of natural Doppler effect from the speaker. So we just had that idea with we just grabbed a Sankin and we would hit the tuning fork, and then we would just play around with getting weird movement. And then with the second, we're able to kind of pitch those much lower, so we can get these really elegant sounding like Doppler effects, essentially. The light ones, they're supposed to feel elegant. Even when you look at them, they're wrapped in drapes and whites, and they have these ornate masks. So we really wanted to make them feel, especially the assassin, make them feel very elegant and smooth and almost regal in a sense.
Talk to me about working with a studio, a group like Sweet Justice. How are cinematics supported by your team, and what's the collaboration like with them?
Like, it was actually a collaboration between three people. So we wanted to bring back the Foley team from the first one because we wanted the Foley to sound very similar, right? So we brought back, Formosa with Don, Jeff, and Alicia. So they were the first ones in, and they walked all the scenes, right? So that's where we got all the detail. And then Sweet Justice took that, did all the mixing and sound effect stuff. And then really our job, Alex and I, and Eric, and all the other approvers had to. Our job was just to make sure that what we did is we set up our LKFS standards pretty early. So we decided, like, okay, so you have to hit, Alex, what was it again? It was like 20 minus 22.
Yeah, spoken VO would be around minus 24 to minus 22, depending.
But the trick is getting our momentary max. So that was like minus 10, I think, or minus 8. So we said, if you hit this, and that's like, at first it was like we're getting stuff back. It wasn't working with game. We're like, and then we decided, we figured out, let's give him a momentary max value. And then Shaba took that. He's like, oh, okay. And then he started mixing stuff. And then all of a sudden, like, everything just started, like, we're like putting it in game, and then you were going from in game to cinematic. It was like perfect.
Yeah. One thing we wanted to make sure is, like, we were all trying to monitor at the same monitoring level when we were mixing the game. And we needed them to also be mixing their cinematics at the exact same monitoring level. So when we get stuff back from them, we can just drag and drop it into the game, and we should have to do 0 adjustments, which ended up being the case for the most part.
So yeah, it was just that communication beforehand to, like, get it in the pocket, right?
There's a little, and there's some uniqueness to it too, because there's also another concept of, like, cinematics in the game, in that a lot of the boss fights feature what you would think are cinematics when they're just boss transitions, but presented in a cinematic form. Where we could have outsourced it to Sweet Justice, but we did some of them, but, like, for the most part, Sweet Justice did the narrative cinematics, so, like, proper narrative cinematics. But then all the boss content was our pillar, or me, and then Jeremy Rogers also assisted. Mike assisted a lot, but, like, the boss pillar included all of that cinematic content, which is more or less like the Thor transitions are massive and high spectacle. The Garm ones are very high spectacle. There's a ton, right? Heimdall, Gryla. So there's a lot of really cool bosses that have super cinematic content that's just, like, so fun to work on, So it kind of itches, like, a lot of us have that, like, linear itch where game is fun, but every now and then it's like, let me just do something linear, So that was super, super fun to work on.
Brian, talk to me about the Bifrost. It's a returning aspect of this game, and to me, I find something small and subtle has a lot of care and attention when it comes to the sound that you guys are creating.
Yeah, so Bifrost is one of the powers that is used across one of the more prevalent enemy types in the game. They're called Odin's army. They're called the Einherjar. And early on in the project, when the team was still forming, we were trying to explore as a team, like, what does Bifrost sound like? So we did a lot of reference hunting, and we had, like, different sound jams as a team to try to explore, like, different styles of the Bifrost. And we kind of, I think it was a direction that Alex was really going, is, like, getting this really tonal, pulled out metal source. And so we decided, let's try to get some cool recordings of underwater sounds, but within, like, metal objects. And so we have a hydrophone in the office, and we decided to get a lot of recordings of hydrophones in big tubs of water or like little canteens, just to see if we can get some weird sloshing and see what that sounds like, and then just stretching it out and pulling it and see what kind of things we can pull from that. And then, Mike, I'll let you talk about you had this really awesome object called a transducer.
Yeah, so I bought a transducer, basically like haptics, like you can stick them in your seat, use bass to like vibrate them. So I bought one off Amazon, and I got this little amp, and then the amp actually had a mini jack out, and I was using an oscillator from my modular rig, and we're just sweeping tones on metal objects and finding their resonant frequency, and then just shaking them, and then recording that, and then doing like dives and like other stuff, and then we got all that source back, and it sounded insane. So yeah, and then Brian, we did a bunch of processing on it, and then that's kind of how all that came together.
Yeah, we basically took that was kind of the meat of the sound, but we also wanted to have some texture to it. So we added lots of different glass and debris, small glassy debris swishing, to kind of mix it around to give it a little bit of sharp edge. And that way, we're basically kind of creating a small library. So this is one of the things that a lot of different creatures could do, or it could be created in different moments in the cinematics. So we kind of created this library and made like a sheet so that we can have like it's basically a style guide. So that way, whenever someone needed to create sounds of Bifrost, we would just kind of hand this to them and say, hey, here's our style guide. Here's the source that you can pull from. Here's some references. This is what it looks like in game. So that way, no matter who was going to design using Bifrost, we were all kind of pulling from the same source library, and then they can kind of inject their style as a designer on top of the context of what they're designing for.
Alex, I'd love for you to talk about the dynamic mix system of this game. It's something when we think about mixing for video games, it's all it's driven by action. It's not like it's set to a time limit. It's based on the character's involvement of the space. And basically you need to think about things could take short amounts of times, or things could be really long. So it's kind of like a variable that you can't set in stone. How do you guys handle your dynamic mixing, and what's unique about the one that you guys built for this game?
It was kind of like a house of cards in a good way, because there's so many systems that are interdependent on one another to sound good. So one of the first things we realized we would need is, like, most of the time in this game, when you're in a regular combat setup, you're fighting like many enemies at one time, sometimes 8, it could go up from there. So we want to make sure that it's not too cluttered, because luckily there's tons of amazing sounds that are playing, lots of detail, lots of rich audio information happening on just one enemy. But now you have like 8 of them. You got to think about, okay, well, like it's like the whole entire like conversational intelligibility thing. Like one person's talking, you hear it. 2 people are talking, you can kind of parse what they're saying, but then once you add 3 people into the mix, 4, it just becomes like a big wash of sound, and you can't really pick out what anyone's saying. And we didn't really want that to happen with combat, because the last thing you don't want to happen is having a situation where you couldn't really hear what you need to hear because there's just too much happening, right? So we wanted to have a system that was subtractive, and I give huge props to the Overwatch team, because they're so talented at what they do, and this idea was largely inspired by them, because when they were trying to figure out mixing for their game with HDR, it's like, well, volume isn't really what's important here. It's more about like how threatening is this character to me. So if we apply that same concept to our game, it's like, well, yeah, if you're fighting 8 people, only 1 or 2 of them I really need to pay attention to. So John McCoy at Blue Point, who helped us a ton on this project, he kind of just went through and just got all this amazing data for us to use. And he kind of created this bucket system that would basically categorize enemies into high or low priority buckets, essentially in real time. And every frame, this would be changing. So I think we ended up deciding that like up to 2 people can occupy like the dangerous bucket. And then anyone who's not in that is going to be deprioritized, turned down in the mix, but also able to be ducked down more. So once we got that tuned up and working, like our combat setups became a lot clearer so that at any given time, and this is always shifting, like I'm only hearing the enemies that are the most threatening to me at one moment. So if someone's attacking me, yeah, I hear it. Now this person's close to me, but they're not really attacking me yet. But then this enemy over here is like firing a crossbow. So now that becomes the important thing. And I think that really like saved us a lot and really helped our combat, be a lot cleaner, which then gives you more room for dialogue, more room for music and stuff. And on top of that, there's a lot of stuff going on. But we had a lot of systems where it's a narrative game, so at the end of the day, dialogue is probably the most important thing, especially when it comes to like narrative, dialogue that drives the story. And we never, wanted to get into a situation where you couldn't really tell what someone was saying. We don't want you to have to play with subtitles on. So what we ended up doing was the louder the game gets, the more sidechaining it does. So if you're in a really quiet space, I don't really want to hear pumping in the ambience at all, and we don't really need to do much to the sound at all if you're hanging out in like the super quiet, cavern. But when things are really loud, you're going to want these real-time sidechain systems to do more work. So we kind of were always reading how loud the game was, and then just telling these, multi-band sidechain systems to just put in more work to kind of get things out of the way. There's a lot of little things we did. We could probably talk for 10 hours about this, but those were like 2 things I think we did that kind of really helped get the game to be a little more clear and cohesive.
I would love for each of you to share kind of your insight. When I look at this, what they say, what the stated time is, you can spend anywhere between 25 to 50 some odd hours within the world of God of War Ragnarok. To me, as a fan and just as someone who plays games, throughout the year, I just find, it's hard to quantify the amount of work and the production cycle, the length it takes to produce these games. But Michael, for you as a supervisor and supporting your team, and every detail is looked at with so much just care and nuance. What to you is your tip? What are your thoughts just about that? For a game like this, what was your takeaway?
I don't bring your A game. Like it was a challenge, and it was super fun. It was super rewarding. It was, there was times when it was really hard, and but in the end it was very satisfying and very, very pleasant. Yeah, no, it was great. Getting to work on this title was amazing. Like as you can see, the set pieces are crazy. So yeah, it pushed my leadership and my sound design skills to the max. So in the end, I'm better for it.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway I got was that be ready for anything and everything, and to search out for new ideas, and then when other things pop up that are better, like latch onto it. Like all of us were kind of on our islands, but at the same time we had a bridge that all connected us, and we all had to connect, like at the same time coordinate with one another to ship this huge game. So yeah, I think it was just the collaboration part was the part that I loved about it. Especially, you're growing the team over years, and then by the end, it's just like, okay, we got to ship this, and then we're like a well-oiled machine at that point. So it's really amazing to see us all kind of just firing on all cylinders and helping each other and supporting each other with all of our goals that we were all aligned on.
I think the main thing is like building relationships, right? Because like making a game is like the biggest team effort like ever, probably. So I think you're not going to just be able to work, on an island, siloed off from everybody. You're going to have to talk with people to really make the game an immersive experience that is really creative at the end of the day. So I think talking to the game director, the writers, the technical designers, visual effects artists, animators, like the list goes on. Even amongst our audio team, the sound team, the dialogue team, you need just to be on the same page with everybody and working together to make the game awesome, because it's not just one person's effort, it's a team effort, and you can only do that by collaborating closely, but making good connections and good relationships with people, so there's a lot of trust and a lot of shared morale. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just like, no matter how tough the project gets, that you have a network of people who are all working towards the same goal to create this amazing experience for the player. So I think having that sort of thing is really good.
It takes a village. It takes a team. Mike, what's the number? There were like 70 something.
73.
So 73 individual humans, different people, across all of our vendors, internal, PlayStation Sound, Sweet Justice. The amount of people that were on this project is insane, right? And I learned very quickly that this isn't like, no one can just do this by themselves, even like the pillars, right? Like, we all relied on dozens of people, each of us. So yeah, like Mike said, it's a great opportunity to work on leadership skills, work on building pipelines to be efficient, because efficiency is huge. And yeah, it was my favorite title I've shipped personally. It's just stunning to look back at it and be like, wow, that happened. That's crazy.
Now that you've had some time away from the project, you can reflect on it in a way that doesn't maybe feel so painful, because these are very long iterative processes. And I think it's to me, why this franchise, why these characters are so successful, because of that process. So I think as fans, thank you for your sacrifice, and we can't wait for the next one. So I won't ask you when the next one's coming out, but I'm excited to see what's next. So yeah, thank you guys all, Beau, Alex, Michael, Brian, really appreciate it. Thank you guys for sharing your stories.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Michael.